VSI team and Tapish sir for arranging this nice presentation to share my topic with you all. And I thank my mentor, Dr. Devarajan sir, to be a part of my presentation and all my colleagues. And I again extend my warm good evening to all the faculties who have joined in this session, and thank you all. So moving on to my topic. Today's my topic is the effect of diabetes mellitus as in vascular patients. So nothing but atherosclerotic risk factor in diabetic. So what I'm going to discuss in this is some brief overview about diabetes mellitus per se and the diabetes mellitus effect on vascular system, either it is a cardiovascular or cerebrovascular or peripheral vascular or microvascular, any other thing. A brief discussion about those things and the effect of diabetes mellitus per se in the peripheral vascular diseases and the typical or particular pathophysiology which is involved in vascular diseases, and a brief discussion about the evaluation of vascular patients because it is a separate big topic, and some of the general treatment protocols or guidelines proposed in patients in diabetic patients who are also having peripheral vascular diseases. So initially, diabetes mellitus straightly correlate with pancreas. So anything related to the beta cell of the pancreas, we can say it as diabetes, but not in particular. So diabetes mellitus can be related to insulin, and insulin per se has wide variety of functions, including basically in one line, what we can say that it eliminates glucose from the running blood. So it eliminates by pushing it into liver as glycogen or adipose tissue as fats or skeletal muscles for uptake. So this is the overview function of pancreas, the insulin per se, which primary aim is to sensitize the peripheral cells for glucose and its usability. So another thing, so how at cellular level, how insulin works is insulin will catch itself upon its insulin receptor in every other cell. And this receptor again phosphorylates the glucose channel, which opens up, leading to influx of glucose into the cells. So simply speaking, insulin is a key for opening door for glucose. So in a healthy patient, every other thing works well, and insulin will easily sensitize the cells for glucose uptake. But in case of diabetic fellows, it is something different. So either insulin is not coming out of the factory, or the insulin, the product insulin is not exhibiting its role. So with this, when it is not coming out of the pancreas, our pancreas is deficient of secreting insulin, we can call it as type 1 diabetes. And when this insulin, secreted insulin, is not going to achieve its function because of peripheral insulin resistance, this receptor resistance, which is called as type 2 diabetes. So accordingly, type 1 diabetes, which I already told, is an absolute insulin deficiency. And out of 100, we can take it as some 50 to 10% of incidence in overall diabetes. And it can affect any age, and it can appear at any age, depending upon the host immune modulations. And it is because of the cellular mediated autoimmune pancreatic cell destruction, which is having a varied genetic and environmental factors. Also, the markers which will be raised, or which the antibodies which will be raised, are against islet cells, either or insulin per se, or anti-glutamic acid decarboxylase, or tyrosine phosphatase, which are all involved in insulin secretion, insulin synthesis. So usually it affects in young individuals. It will be presented early, either in the child or adulthood, but it can present at any time. And in this type 1 diabetes mellitus, as I already told, the factor is not going to synthesize, because of which every other thing is affected, leading to hyperglycemia and its effects. So the clinical presentation usually will be, the first presentation also will be acute hyperglycemia or diabetic ketoacidosis. This will be a typical presentation in most of the cases, and it will be the first one. As I already told, it will be affecting any age, mostly the adolescent and the children, associated with many autoimmune diseases like SLE and others. Next is type 2 diabetes. So this type 2 diabetes is a well-known factor and it is widely presenting in every other individual, and it is shifting its incidence to a lower age group. Even in young adults are nowadays predisposed to type 2 diabetes because of the increasing trends of obesity, because of the lifestyle modifications. So it is nothing but insulin resistance and its inadequacy to compensate insulin secretion. So both can be taken under type 2 diabetes. So either it can be in a perfect insulin resistance, or the glucose level may not be tolerated with an adequate insulin secretion. That is only a feedback mechanism. It will not actually per se related to a deficient pancreas producing free insulin, which is a different entity. So this is something different. And it will be having a heterogeneous cause, varied cause, environmental, genetic, every other cause is being put forward, and a pinpoint cause cannot be established. And with all the studies, it is clearly seen that obesity is having a strong relation with type 2 diabetes mellitus. As I already told, varied cause, one of them will be heritable, and up to 50% of the cases will be having a heritable predisposition for diabetes type 2. And there are some more than 88 gene locations have been identified, out of which some of the genes are not completely related to obesity. One among them is a NAT2. Others are some or other related to obesity and other predisposing factors. And this piece, which we already know of, urea, dyspea, and phagia, will occur in type 2 diabetes mellitus because it is not an acute event. So it will be having its subtle course for a quite long number of period, within which the patient may have an initiation or an early onset of any vascular complications. The patient may not know of diabetes, but he will be having an undergoing vascular alterations, and lately they may present with vascular abnormalities. So this is nothing but pancreas will be completely normal, producing normal insulin, and the insulin cannot establish its action in the periphery because the periphery will be having a resistance, or the insulin receptors will not be that will not have that affinity for insulin to exhibit its action. So this is for a quite overview of diabetes mellitus per se, which every other fellow knows of very well. And what are the effects of diabetes on particular vascular system? So diabetes, the complications of diabetes are primarily vascular. So they affect or target vascular systems primarily, and because of which the subsequent effects occurs. And these are either macrovascular or microvascular. So this macrovascular or microvascular are because of their end targets. So if they are affecting arterioles or capillaries, then they will be microvascular. And this is mostly related to hyperglycemia. How long the patient is being on hyperglycemia, they will be more predisposed to capillary or arteriolar. In other words, microvascular complications in the form of retinopathy, neuropathy, and nephropathy. In case of macrovascular complications, the relation of hyperglycemia is not that well established. And the other important thing that is well established is insulin resistance. So for as a general thing, we can take for microvascular hyperglycemia and macrovascular insulin resistance, but it is not a pinpoint definition or criteria. Every other thing overlaps, but we can take it as general. So this affects cardiovascular, cerebrovascular, or peripheral vascular systems, leading on to their macrovascular complications. So these are the major complication overview in which we can see it can affect retinopathy, eye, nephropathy, kidney, or neuropathy as a microvascular complication, and brain, heart, extremities as a macrovascular complications. So what is happening is this hyperglycemia, which will alter the entire homeostasis, and it will result in increased sorbitol pathway, hexaminase pathway, advanced glycosylated end products pathway, and because of which there will be an increased oxidative stress and increased free fatty acids. So all these together will result in abnormal immune regulation, leading on to increased pro-inflammatory and inflammatory cytokines and chemokines, resulting in inflammation, altered smooth vascular smooth muscle functions, resulting in increased collagen synthesis in abnormal sites, and extracellular movement of or extracellular matrix development, and because of which there results the microvascular complications. So roughly, it is not 5 years, but it can be taken as a short duration. So in any type 1 diabetes, they can have their microvascular complications with an uncontrolled or a persistent hyperglycemia in a period of some, if at all they are crossing some 30 to 40 years, they may have. If at all they are going to be, if at all they have been diagnosed with diabetes in their early ages, in the childhood. And this sequence again continues. So this is mainly because the microvascular is mainly because of perivascular fibrosis. That is a very important point. And then it continues, the scenario continues, and it goes and affects the endothelial cell. So endothelial cell per se is been affected by this hyperglycemia and more predominantly insulin resistance, resulting in endothelial dysfunction. This is the primary starting point for a macrovascular complication to occur. The initiating key is endothelial dysfunction. When this starts, subsequently it results in atherosclerosis at various levels of macrovasculature and their effects. So we are in this topic, I'm mainly focused on the macrovascular complications in the form of coronary artery disease. So in this case, the incidence is increasing with diabetes, and a patient, the chance of getting coronary artery disease is being pushed some 10 to 15 years earlier when they are having diabetes rather than non-diabetic patients. And any diabetic patients who's been affected with coronary artery disease will have a high chance of recurrence, and any interventional procedures will have a grave outcome, and also there is a more chance of death. So in case of cerebrovascular diseases, there is double the risk for diabetic fellows. So any diabetic fellows will be having double the risk for cerebrovascular disease than the others. And in this case, not the glycemia is going to affect the risk. It is not a predicting factor. So it is the duration of diabetes which is an independent predicting factor in case of cerebrovascular disease. And this can be added with the hyperglycemia. So this hyperglycemia will be having these effects in the form of the recanalization failure rate will be high. There is a many chance that any infarct can change into a hemorrhagic conversion, or there is many a chance there may occur a recurrence. And if at all the patient is going to resolve or recover from this CVA, there is a long-term disability or lifestyle morbidity for the patients. So moving on to the peripheral vascular disease per se, the topic of interest. So the incidence is variable, and in any diabetics, particularly type 2 diabetics with any type 2 diabetic fellows who are less than 50 years, the chance of getting a peripheral arterial disease is less than 0.9. And these are being established in Nahans and Partners trials, and any older patients will be having a 15% around incidence of getting diabetes mellitus, getting peripheral arterial disease in diabetic patients. And the provocating factors will be the age, which I already discussed, race. In America, in US, it has been proposed that American Indians and Hispanics are more prone for peripheral arterial disease and rather than other fellows. And smoking, the duration of diabetes, peripheral neuropathy, and the important factor, insulin resistance, all are provocating factors for peripheral arterial disease in diabetic fellows. And the common cause for non-traumatic lower limb extremity amputations in the United States is because of diabetic peripheral arterial diseases. And this diabetic peripheral arterial diseases tend to affect more distal vasculature in like popliteal and tibials, which may lead to difficult interventional procedures. There may be a difficult endovascular or open interventions because there will be a poor distal runoff vessels. And this peripheral neuropathy in the form of sensory motor or autonomic is having a very important significant role, because any peripheral arterial diseases can turn into a critical limb failure because of this peripheral neuropathy, which can predispose to frequent ulcerations because of deformities like swan neck deformity, etc. And putting together the diabetes mellitus and peripheral arterial diseases has a very high risk for cardiovascular events, which has been established in LIPAD study. So the pathophysiology. So what is diabetes going to do on the vasculature? So normal endothelium, and endothelium, which is the inner lining of a vasculature, and the in other words we can say endocrine gland of the vasculature. So simply we can put it in this term: endocrine gland of the vasculature is regulating the entire vascular system with production of some regulating and feedback mechanisms. So the particular and most important regulatory mechanism concerned for this diabetic to affect the endothelium and the vasculature are production of nitric oxide. So this nitric oxide is called as a potent anti-atherogenic factor. So this nitric oxide is produced from L-arginine by endothelial nitric oxide synthase. So this mechanism is very important for endothelium to prevent further progression of any vasculature into atherosclerotic process. So it has been regulated by various hormones, including insulin and other chemokine factors and ionic channels. So this eNOS to nitric oxide from L-arginine is very important, and it can be inhibited by several factors, by glycoxylation and asymmetric dimethyl arginine and various other factors, which I will be discussing subsequently. So the preliminary factors is metabolic dearrangements, hypercoagulability induced by alteration of calcium homeostasis by diabetes, inflammation because of activation of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and the resulting vascular dysfunction and neuropathy. So these are the preliminary factors. And because of these factors, the effects will be of atherogenic phenotype. The normal phenotype gets converts into atherogenic phenotype. And it is because of the outcome, the endothelial cell dysfunction, which is the primary thing, the oxidative stress because of these entire channels, and because of these two, the resulting vascular smooth muscle dysfunction. So this diabetes mellitus, as I already told in the previous slide, because of the increased oxidative stress, inflammation, and the decreased regulation of the decreased vasodilatation, decreased angiogenesis, increased inflammation, and increased reactive oxygen species. So all these together put into the complications. So we can study this pathophysiology with two cells. One is endothelium and another is platelets. So this endothelium, the foremost thing, is dysfunctional, which alters from its normal function, and the prime cause being hyperglycemia and insulin resistance. This insulin resistance can be taken as an independent factor causing endothelial cell dysfunction, which I already told, which is very significant in type 2 diabetes mellitus. So normally endothelium will have its function on maintaining the vascular tone, regulating the platelets activity, leukocytes adhesion, smooth muscle cell migration and proliferation, and autocrine and paracrine functions. So this endothelial nitric oxide synthase giving nitric oxide, which inhibits the inflammatory transcripting factors, thereby reducing the pro-inflammatory chemokines or cytokines and inhibiting platelet activation. So, because of nitric oxide production, this nitric oxide is going to reduce smooth muscle contraction, decrease smooth muscle proliferation, decrease platelet aggregation, decrease oxidation of LDL, decreased endothelial production of chemoattractive factors, decreased monocyte and platelet additions, and expression of addition molecules will be decreased. So these are all put together prevent the cell or the vascular system to enter into atherosclerosis, because of which this nitric oxide is a potent anti-atherogenic factor. So hyperglycemia, how it is acting as a factor? This hyperglycemia acts in such a way that it increases the intracellular reactive oxygen species, the endothelial intracellular reactive oxygen species, which again inhibits endothelial nitric oxide production by inhibiting the endothelial nitric oxide synthase, leading to atherogenic potential. So in another manner, it also activates the mitochondrial superoxide anions, which will cause cellular mitogenic pathway activation by activating advanced glycoside end products, protein kinase C, and nuclear factor kappa beta. And because of all this, there will be an increased inflammatory response in the intimal layer of the cell, intimal layer of the vasculature, leading to vascular inflammation and subsequent atherosclerosis. So this that is for hyperglycemia. So next thing is the insulin resistance. So this insulin resistance, how is going to act as a factor? So this insulin resistance will impair the endothelial insulin signaling. So because of the impaired endothelial insulin signaling, the receptors are impaired and they can't take up the insulin and put it into the signals into the cell. That is the reduced nitric oxide production, atherogenic potential, and subsequent bleeding. So this picture, it will give some clear idea what I said in the previous two slides. So either it is hyperglycemia or insulin resistance, both are vicious cycle. This or that will happen because of either of the two. And this hyperglycemia, as I already told, would increase the reactive oxygen species and mitochondrial superoxides inside the endothelial cells, which is going to inhibit the BH4 necessary for endothelial nitric oxide to function and produce nitric oxide. And again, together with hyperglycemia, the obesity, the free fatty acids will also have mitochondrial uncoupling of reactive oxygen species. So this is on one part. Another part, the insulin. This insulin, because of the insulin resistance of the receptors, it will not go into the P13 activating system, the mTOR activating pathway in the synthesis of endothelial nitric oxide synthase. So because of which endothelial nitric oxide synthase will not be available adequately, so there will be a chance of L-arginine not able to converted into nitric oxide. So the terminal product will not be produced. So this is a picture with a clear overview. So here I put a picture to differentiate the both. So this is a normal endothelial cell and this is a dysfunctional endothelial cell. So normal endothelial cell with nitric oxide results in smooth muscle relaxation or vasodilatation and anti-atherosclerotic. And the dysfunction endothelial cell, because of the ultimate result, leads to vasoconstriction and smooth muscle migration, leading to a pro-atherogenic state. So this insulin, I already told, because of PI3K or mTOR pathway causes endogenous nitric oxide synthase production, facilitating nitric oxide production. And and also prostacyclin synthesis leading to vascular smooth muscle dilatation. Hyperglycemia, fatty acids, insulin resistance, and angiotensin 2 altogether have their effects at various levels, preventing nitric oxide production and increased prostacyclin thromboxane synthesis, and angiotensin 2 directly can cause vascular smooth muscle migration and endothelin 1 production. So this is usually regulated or inhibited by insulin receptor and insulin through insulin receptor, and because of the dysfunction it will be activated, leading to endothelin 1 synthesis. So this is the difference between a dysfunctional cell and a normal cell. So because of these effects, the results is the atherosclerosis. So how atherosclerosis occurs? Because of the reactive species and other insulin resistance, there is an increased pro-inflammatory activity. So because of that, the endothelial cell becomes dysfunctional and allows the free-floating LDL and ApoB inside the intima. So this barrier effect will give away and they will come inside. So this LDL and ApoB, which enters into the intimal layer, will attract the monocytes because of the because of the impaired endothelial cell. So this endothelial cell will push out the receptors to attract mononuclear cells, and they will be coming inside and being and they will enter into the intimal layer, and they becomes macrophages. They engulf the LDL, get converted into foam cells, and this foam cells again will because of the reactive oxygen radicals from the endothelial cells. Again, this foam cells will attract many monocytes, T helper lymphocytes, and neutrophils. So every other thing altogether leads to the formation of atherosclerotic plaque. So this is the one. So this is the foam cell formation, and this foam cell is the basis for atherosclerotic plaque, and every other mechanism goes hand together, as I already told before. So summarizing, this diabetes will cause endothelial dysfunction, inflammation, and fibrosis through decreased nitric oxide bioavailability, increased oxygen free radicals, increased pro-inflammatory and decreased anti-inflammatory factors, and ultimately resulting in increased fibrotic factors. So ultimately, every other thing results in atherosclerosis. So this is for endothelial cell dysfunction. And next, another important is the platelet dysfunction. So here the platelet dysfunction, so this insulin have its effects on every other cell, RBC, monocytes, platelets, endothelium, and particularly these platelets, it is having a regulation. It upregulates the PGE1 and PGI2 and the anti-aggregatory factors. So these are all the anti-aggregatory factors, and down-regulates the aggregatory axis. Hello. Hello. Shall I proceed, sir? Hello. And also, it causes a decreased collagen, thrombin, and epinephrine. So because of all these actions putting together, there is a synchronized platelet action leading on to an anti-atherogenic effect. So the basic in atherogenesis is upregulation of the GP, 1B, 2B, and 3A receptors because of the von Willebrand factor and platelet fibrin interactions. So these are all effects are because of hyperglycemia, which can alter the calcium homeostasis, resulting in increased procoagulating factors and decreased anticoagulating factors. So because of which there is a many chance for atherosclerosis. So diabetic patients are more prone for peripheral atherosclerotic disease through these mechanisms. And any peripheral atherosclerotic patient in diabetes mellitus to be evaluated carefully, clearly, and every other focus should be made on extremities in addition to the other systems. So per se for extremity, so there should be a picture perfect clear physical examination with an addition of examination of the neuropathies, because diabetic neuropathy will be a symmetric sensory motor polyneuropathy, and the distribution will be from distal to the proximal like a glove and stockings distribution. And what the Diabetic Association, the American Diabetic Association recommends is for any patient with diabetes mellitus more than 50 years, there should be an annual lower limb extremity examination together coupled with ABA. So this is a monofilament test, which is a test used for sensory neuropathy. So this is an overview for the vascular evaluation. And moving on to a summarized guidelines for treatment for diabetic mellitus and peripheral arterial diseases. So the important goals being improved limb outcomes and reducing the morbidity and mortality associated with peripheral arterial diseases in the form of cardiac or cerebrovascular. So the first thing they are putting forward is preventing or preventive foot care measure in order to prevent any non-critical limb to be turning into a critical limb. So the etiological triads will be peripheral neuropathy, ischemia, and infection. So these are all the triads which leads to a critical limb ischemia. And there should be an annual proper foot examination. So the SBS and American Podiatric Association recommends to have an annual foot examination and a monofilament test, a proper evaluation and clear knowledge, a database about the patient's family, their previous genetic predisposition, and how far diabetes should be managed. Every other thing should be data-based. And there should be a proper custom-made foot care for every other individual patients. So the glycemic control is one important thing which is very mandatory to prevent any forthcoming complications. So this glycemic control per se. So hyperglycemia is directly impacting on the macrovascular complications, not directly. So it is through insulin resistance or through some other indirect pathways. Per se, macrovascular complications are because of insulin resistance of endothelial cells. So this ACCORD Advance and VADT trials, what they try to establish is they want a tight glucose control with the HbA1c levels less than 6.5. So they were targeted. So that what they saw is there is no significant difference between patients with the levels less than 8 and levels less than 6.5. So what the American Diabetic Association ultimately comes to a conclusion is to have a recommendation of HbA1c level less than 7%. And moving on to the next thing, the drugs, medications for diabetes mellitus. So the first and foremost thing in the form of metformin. So what they found is metformin over other diabetic medications, the oral medications like sulfonylureas, were found to be having a significant role in reducing myocardial infarction and mortality. So this has been established in United Kingdom diabetic study, and because of which metformin is being taken as the first line drug for type 2 diabetes mellitus. Some approval is coming, sir.
For what? Just go ahead.
Okay, sir.
No problem. You go ahead.
Oh, I can't move this after this approval. And some other drugs, some other trials for some other drugs, the pioglitazone and rosiglitazone being trialed in proactive and VADT trials, in which what they try to establish is their strong association with prevention of cardiovascular events in a peripheral arterial disease in diabetic patients. But what they found is this pioglitazone is no way going to help in that aspect, but rather it will help in reducing the amputation risks in such patients. But rosiglitazone has a very good role in reducing the cardiovascular deaths or events in peripheral arterial disease diabetic patients. And in BARI 2D trial, what they want to study is they want to study insulin providing therapy versus insulin sensitization therapy. In other words, insulin versus oral hypoglycemic agents in peripheral arterial diabetic patients. So the effect of them over progression of the atherosclerosis and any progression of the disease to critical limb. So they want to establish this. And what they infer is insulin sensitization over insulin providing is better in preventing the progression of peripheral arterial diseases. So this can be established by the pathophysiology because so this insulin providing therapy will cause reduction of glycemia, the blood glycemia. Hyperglycemic state can be reduced by insulin providing therapy. But insulin sensitization therapy, the oral hypoglycemic agents, or in other words, metformin, we can take it. So they will cause peripheral sensitization or insulin sensitization of the tissues. So which is a prime factor in peripheral arterial disease. So insulin sensitization rather than decreasing the glucose level in the blood is very important in preventing the progression of peripheral arterial disease. So this has been established very well in this trial. And because of which what the Diabetic Association recommends is, so this is the sequence of recommendation by the Diabetic Association. So first to go with the lifestyle modification, which can have a very good insulin sensitization of the peripheral tissues with an added metformin. Again, it's gonna do the same. If at all the diabetic control is not achieved, means the HbA1c is not less than 0.7. And we can add subsequently any other oral drugs or insulin, either of the others, if at all again not controlled. And lastly, if every other thing is being tried, if again the diabetic level is not controlled, we should add insulin therapy. This is not for peripheral arterial disease with critical impatients. This is for diabetic patients per se, or peripheral arterial disease with and diabetes, and in other words, they are not critically threatened with ischemic necrosis of the tissues. In which case, insulin is a better therapy over others. Next is risk factor control. So in risk factor control, we have to look upon the other risk factors, the allied colics of diabetes mellitus in the form of dyslipidemia, hypertension, and other things. So this dyslipidemia, what they infer is modest intensity statins can be used for primary prevention. With patients around 40 to 70 years and LDL levels more than 70 milligram, we can use statins. And statins are being studied in various trials. And what they have found is they are having a definitive risk reduction in other systems like cardiovascular and central nervous system. So it has been established in these two trials. So ultimately what they infer from multiple randomized studies are statins are way better than other lipid lowering agents in the form of fibrates, etc. in the cardiovascular or cerebrovascular risk reduction or mortality reduction. So moving on to the next one, the hypertension. So this hypertension will affect by affecting on the macrovascular area. So rather it affects a macrovascular component and increases the death risk. And together, if at all it is allied with diabetes, it is having a very worse results. So what they want to establish is, they want to establish a proper hypertensive control in diabetic patients, and they tried to fix it at 144/82 millimeter of mercury, and they found that there is a 32% significant risk reduction. And with an added ACE inhibitors, so the ACE inhibitors as a treatment drug for hypertension over calcium channel blockers, they found that they have an improved cardiac outcome. But it should be properly titrated, and the indication should be properly dealt with. So the Joint National Committee guidelines for diabetic patients is to have a blood pressure of less than 140 or 90 millimeter of mercury. So this goal has to be established for diabetic patients to reduce the future complications of cardiovascular or cerebrovascular systems. So this ACE inhibitors already trialed are having a better role in reducing cardiovascular risk, particularly in peripheral arterial disease patients. But the angiotensin II receptor blockers are having a very good role in reducing the foot ulcer and amputations in peripheral arterial disease patients, which has been established in Margolis et al. So next are the antiplatelets. So that is for the risk factors, the allied risk factors, and next is for antiplatelet therapy. So in this case, what they try to say is this aspirin per se may not have a useful or fruitful role in preventing the forthcoming complications in diabetic patients with peripheral vascular diseases, particularly in cardiovascular area. So which is being established by these two trials, and still the trials are running with large numbers to establish or to find out the role of aspirin in preventing cardiovascular complications in peripheral vascular disease patients in a diabetic setup. But the Diabetic Association for now proposed low dose aspirin therapy of 75 milligram to 162 milligram for some selected patients. The patients being those who are having more than 10% risk of getting cardiovascular events in a period of 10 years. And also for male more than 850 years and female for more than 60 years with additional factors in the form of smoking, hypertension, previous family histories, albuminuria, all together. So all the patients comes under this category, they can take from 75 to 162 milligram of aspirin daily. Sorry. So Capri trial tries to establish clopidogrel over aspirin in reducing cardiovascular risks. So ultimately, SVS, what they proposed is to have some 75 to 325 milligrams of aspirin or 75 milligram of clopidogrel OD for patients with peripheral arterial diseases. And specific therapy to diabetic patients with peripheral arterial disease. So the previous ones are common therapy to cardiovascular and cerebrovascular, but this is for specifically for peripheral vascular diseases. So in this case, exercise therapy and silastazole are proposed as good alternatives for patients to have a very good symptomatic improvement. So this exercise therapy improves intermittent claudication. So it will be prolonging the distance to onset of pain and the maximum pain attaining duration. So everything is improved by exercise therapy. And this clever study, what it tries to establish is, it tries to establish the role of exercise therapy as an allied treatment in other intervention for peripheral vascular diseases. So in this study, they tried with medical treatment alone, medical treatment with supervised exercise and interventional treatment. So what they found is the best will be the interventional treatment, but also they found that supervised exercise group showed very good greatest improvement rather than medical therapy alone. And this is still being established by super study, which is an ongoing process. So what SPS recommends is to go for a supervised exercise. The exercise 3 times per week for a period of 30 to 60 minutes, brisk walk, and it should be for some 12 weeks period. Or if at all the patient can't go for it, they can do it at the home with an equally alternative exercises. So next is silastazole, which is a phosphodiesterase 3 inhibitor, helps in causing vasodilatation, anti-proliferative and anti-platelet effects. So it has been studied to improve claudication in stable intermittent claudication patients. So what SVS proposes is to go for 3 months trial of 100 milligram BD to see whether the patient is having a response or improvement in claudication. And as we already know, it is not going to have a good useful results in cardiac patients. So cardiac, renal or hepatic patients should not go for silastazole. So pentoxiflin is not been properly established as having no proper study or establishing pentoxiflin to have a better role. But though it is proposed to have inhibiting role over phosphodiesterase and potentiating endogenous prostacyclins. And SBS also says to go for a trial. If at all the patient is contraindicated with silastazole, we can go for a trial with pentoxiflin with 400 milligram to see how far the response of the patients are. Again, as I already told, statins are having a very good role in peripheral arterial diseases, and simvastatin have a definite role in reducing cardiovascular events. And statin should be included in symptomatic peripheral arterial disease patients is being proposed by the SPS. AC inhibitors, I already told that they are having a very good role in having a pain-free walking in patients with peripheral arterial disease. So if at all the patient is not going to benefited with medical treatment and needs surgical treatment, has to be referred early for surgical intervention, either endovascular or open procedures. So ultimately, the take-home message from this presentation, which I want to reiterate, is the vascular systems are the primordial systems being affected by diabetes. Hyperglycemia and insulin resistance are the sole reasons for endothelial dysfunction and platelet dysfunction and the subsequent sequelae resulting in atherosclerosis. Good glycemic control with proper insulin sensitization are the prime goals inferred from the pathophysiology. Proper clinical surveillance of diabetic patients with peripheral arterial disease will prevent them from progressing to critical limb ischemia and interventional needy patients. Early appropriate treatment at appropriate time prevents patients' morbidity and also the mortality. Thank you.